All right. It says we're streaming now, but I'm not seeing it come up on their YouTube yet, so we'll give it just a minute. There we go, Brandon. I see us now. So I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the garden planning session today. It's part of a series of garden presentations that are being put on by the Augusta, Amory, Ellsworth, and Clear Lake libraries in Wisconsin here. And today we're going to talk about garden planning, and for people who are just wanting to get into gardening or starting, kind of figuring out where to start here and how to wrap your head around the planning process. So my name is Brandon Wiarda. I run Sleepy Root Farm with my wife, Heather, and we have been running our farm for about 10 years now. We started 10 years ago doing market gardening as a CSA farm, where people would buy subscriptions to the farm, and then we would deliver them a box of vegetables every week throughout the growing season. A couple years ago, we decided to get some off-farm jobs and scale down our operation. And so now we're mainly doing under an acre worth of garlic for market farming or for market gardening. And then we also have our own home garden that we do on top of that as well. So good to be quite an open session here. And if people have questions, they can feel free to chime in on the chat, and I'll try to answer them as we go if we see them. And if I miss seeing the questions, people can chime in and let me know too if they want. They can just speak up. So feel free to ask questions and talk, and we'll just have this be more of a conversation than anything. So to start off, what presentation is mainly about is answering the question, I want to start a garden, how do I plant it? So when a lot of people think about starting a garden, they're going to think of something pretty grand, like the image that you might see on the right here, where you just have a really beautiful scene, all sorts of healthy plants. Or maybe they're going to do something a little smaller scale and go on what's going on the left, where they're doing a raised bed situation and really just growing an abundance of food. And you can certainly grow a lot of stuff in a small space, but it takes a lot of work to get to either one of these stages. Both of these pictures, someone had done a lot of planning, and they had thought quite a bit about what they were looking for in their end product. And they made it happen, but it took a lot of time to do it. Some of the things that we're not going to cover in this presentation, though, we'll go into more depth about things like planting and weeding and stuff like that. That'll all be covered in other presentations in this series, so I'm going to leave that stuff for later on. But if people have questions about that along the way, I'd be happy to answer them too. So step one for planning your garden is figuring out, what do you want your garden for? Maybe you want to have a garden so you can mainly do preserving, like canning tomatoes or freezing green beans, or getting fresh sweet corn frozen so you can have it all winter long. You don't necessarily have to be planning it for what's going to be on your table that week or during the summer, but stuff that you might just want to bulk up your freezer with or your pantry with. Maybe you want it for fresh eating, and you just want to have the freshest salad greens you can get, the freshest green beans that you could possibly get, and the tastiest carrots you can get. And that's going to be a different set of planning tools that you're going to do, and your garden's going to look different in that case as well. Maybe you want it to be educational, especially people with kids that want their kids to be exposed to that, to learn more about how plants grow, where food comes from. All that can be very important to pass on to children, especially if all they've been exposed to is what they're getting at the grocery store. Also, maybe you want just to be ornamental, that you want some beautiful flowers or beautiful herbs that you can have out in your garden or cut to bring into your house or give away to friends. And maybe your primary motivation is to have it as a hobby. Gardening is just a wonderful thing to do and a beautiful pastime, and is a great way to spend the hours on a nice day. It's a great excuse to be outside. It's a great excuse to be in the ground, and a great excuse to get to know plants a lot better. On top of the hobby part would be curiosity. A lot of what drove me into getting into gardening, and then later on into market gardening, was just plain curiosity about how plants grow. Um, to me, when I first started gardening, it was a real manifestation of the miracle of life happening right in front of me. And that was very powerful and very intriguing to me. And it really drove me to want to discover more and more about it. And the deeper I got into it, the more I just wanted to do it full time until we decided to really bite it off and become market gardeners full time. So curiosity is a really good one. And also just having that desire to have some kind of spiritual fulfillment on the side of being able to grow stuff and be a witness and participant in a natural system. How involved you want to be is another great question. This will really determine what your garden is going to look like as well for this first step. Maybe you want to be a weekend warrior or just a couple days a week, and you want to put in essentially some minimal effort on your garden. On the other hand, maybe you want to have it be something that you're out there every single day after work or over your lunch hour and spending a lot of your weekend time on it. And it's, to the level of being a hobby or an avocation, which would really be an elevated form of that. So not quite a vocation where you're making money from it, but the unpaid version of a vocation. Um, and how much money do you want to spend on it? A lot of people want to do gardening because they think it's going to save them money on food, which is definitely true, but there are some larger upfront costs to it as far as buying your transplants and your seeds, and if you need to put fencing up and prepping your ground and investing in proper fertilization so that you can have healthy plants. And a lot of those things you don't really want to skimp on because then your garden's going to be kind of a disappointment if you don't have those basics behind it to make it a good garden. And also, if you're growing your own food, you're going to want it to be the best you can do for it because you're really controlling the nutrients that you get into your body in that case. So you want your plants to be as healthy as they can be too, because they're going to provide you that sustenance. So after you've kind of answered that first question about why are you doing this and how's your garden going to look based on what you're getting into it for, the next step is going to be to look at your location. So how much space do you have? Are you working with a big open field? Are you working with a plot in your backyard? Maybe you're looking at your front porch that gets good sun for most of the day and you're thinking I can put a couple containers out there. And that's all going to be considerations. And some of those will be limitations and some of those might be daunting because it seems like you can just grow and grow and grow. Is there shade? If you're in the backyard or someplace like that, you really have to be cognizant of how much shade you have going on in your garden. Plants really need adequate sunlight during the day to really grow to their full potential. You can do gardens that are partially shaded, but you'll want to pick and choose which crops get in there to make sure they're successful. Something like lettuce is perfectly fine with having a lower amount of sunlight because it's used to being grown in those shoulder seasons of spring and fall. Those are really the best times to grow it, where it's a little bit cooler and we don't have those really long days. So growing lettuce in the summertime when you might have longer days, it's fine with having some shade and will perform well. It would actually benefit from the cooler temperatures of the shade as well. But we'll get into cool and hot stuff later. But if you want to grow something like tomatoes or peppers, our season up this far north is pretty short anyways, and not giving it adequate sunlight during those short growing times for a crop that really likes hot temperatures and really wants to get off quick, you're going to want to make sure you have plenty of sunlight for a crop like peppers or tomatoes. And are you open to deer? Do you ever see deer tracks coming through the spot where you're looking to put your garden, or have you seen deer out there? Usually close to your home, you don't necessarily have to worry about as much. Deer tend not to come right up to the household or maybe in your backyard. But if you're doing something that's, 100, 200 feet away from your home, it's probably going to be more vulnerable to deer. And deer are such a pain in this area. There are so many of them everywhere, and great for hunters, not great for gardeners. So a lot of gardeners in this area and a lot of market gardeners who make their living from it put a lot of money into fencing. We ourselves, when we were doing market gardening full time, we put up a giant fence around our property that cost us about $10,000. So it's a serious deal to keep the deer out because they will totally wipe out your crops. And once they know your crops are there, they are definitely coming back to see more. And if they don't eat your crop, there's a good chance they're going to poop on your crop, which is another dilemma right there, right? So do you need a fence, or are you in a spot that you think you'll be okay? Or are you just going to roll the dice and see? Sometimes it's okay to roll the dice if you feel like you're in an okay spot, but maybe you want to put up a fence for our personal garden now, since we're not doing a big market garden. Our personal garden is in an area where deer can get into. So we actually bought some um, relatively inexpensive bird netting from a farming company, and we put some rebar up and then strung the bird netting around the outside perimeter of our garden. So it doesn't cover the top of it. Birds can still get in, but that's okay. But the deer find it enough of a barrier that they don't want to get in. And the space is small enough where they don't really think about jumping into it. Um, if it's a bigger open space, you're definitely going to need a taller garden. But if you're talking about a plot that's like 10 by 15 or 20 feet, they probably won't jump over just a regular fence just to get into there because the space is pretty tight anyways. So when you're thinking about your location, like I'd mentioned before, you might be looking at your porch and thinking about containers. You might be looking at right outside your house and thinking about doing raised beds, or maybe even tilling up some of the ground next to your house or in a field. Gardens are a great way to get rid of some of your lawn, give you less things to mow, and also do something a little more productive with it than just have grass out there. And also something a lot more interesting to spend your time and then look at too. Um, so those are also questions. Where's your garden going to be? And is it going to be in the ground, or is it going to be in a raised bed? Like you might see on the right where they have a couple boards and then they put soil in it. Or is it going to be even higher, like the lady who's standing in the bottom corner there, who can actually stand up while she's gardening. And that's kind of a nice thing for people if they have some trouble getting down low. And it can also be a nice way for weed management too. If you're not planning on a big garden, you might just want to do something that's elevated and you can bring in your own soil from it. Potting soil works good, or mixing with compost. And you put that inside a container, and you're really not going to have hardly any weeds in there because you're not starting off in a spot that's already got weed seed on it. So that can be a real benefit. And then you're also not having to get rid of any grass that you might have, which can be a little tricky, or tilling anything up. So those are all good considerations. Or maybe you just want a few fresh herbs, and that's a great way to add some extra flavor to your meals every day by just having a couple potted herbs out on your porch, where you can go and pick oregano or pick some basil. Um, and those of you who have had that in the past, or have been lucky enough to be in families with gardens, or neighbors who give you fresh vegetables, or to subscribe to a farm who does fresh vegetables, fresh herbs are just amazing. There's just night and day difference between picking an herb freshly and eating it, and getting an herb that's been sitting around for a few weeks already. So those are really nice ways just to start and do something simple. And as you can see in the other bottom left-hand corner, you can do things like tomatoes and have those work out pretty good in pots. You can also get hanging baskets for things like tomatoes too. So really, even just if you're not willing to bite off a whole big project of doing a garden, like the one in the top left, you could do something small that just adds really nice treats and nice snacks and nice additions to your meals to really give you a little extra hobby to do and a little bright way to spruce up your dinners. And kids love fresh vegetables, um, especially things like cherry tomatoes and fresh peppers and fresh carrots. I know our daughter, who is 6 now, she is very hit or miss about eating kale if it's been cooked. But if she can go and pick kale out of the garden and eat it, she will just chomp it up. And she loves just eating it raw, straight. And it's amazing how, I don't know if sensitive would be the right word, but it seems like kids are very sensitive to that freshness of it, and really have an affinity for more fresh vegetables and fruits in that way. So great way to get your kids interested in eating things that they normally wouldn't eat. So how are you going to prepare your soil is another good question when you're thinking about your location. There's a lot of ways to prepare your soil. There's a lot of different tools available. You might already have some tools. You might know neighbors who have tools. And you're going to want to assess, what's available to you to use. And you're also going to want to think about what methods really resonate with you as far as preparing a bed or getting your soil. And then, of course, like we were talking about before, are you planting in the ground? Are you going to plant in a raised bed or in containers? If you're doing a high raised bed or containers, you're probably going to be providing your own potting soil or your own compost to plant your plants in. So you're not going to have to really worry too much about preparing your soil. You're just going to essentially buy your soil and put it where it needs to be and maintain it. If you're doing it in the ground, it gets a little more complicated, but it also opens up a lot more possibilities where things can go. Um, and I personally just love planting things in the ground because you're working with a soil that already has loads and loads of bacteria and fungi and all sorts of what they call the microbiome, all the little tiny critters that live in the soil, like the ones you can't see, little tiny critters that live in the soil that really make the soil work and really make it alive. If you're interested in gardening and want to go down a huge rabbit hole, start looking into the microbiome and see what bacteria and fungi are beneficial. It's just fascinating. As far as the science on that goes, we're really at just hitting the tip of the iceberg of understanding how all these tiny, tiny organisms really interact with the soil and keep it healthy and recycle nutrients and provide nutrients and how they really make it a larger living organism that allows plants to grow. So personally, from a philosophical approach and a spiritual approach, I like growing in the soil myself. But you know what? Everything's going to have some bacteria in it to make it work, and some fungi, even potting soil you buy, as soon as you, even if it's sterilized, as soon as you put that in your pot, there's fungi and bacteria floating around the air all the time. There's stuff already in your container. It will become colonized by things, and it will have teeming life in it for sure. And without that teeming life, you wouldn't have the proper nutrient cycling to make plants actually work. So a little bit of an aside there, but that's why I usually prefer to go into the ground. But you work with what you got, right? So whatever can make it work for you, do it, and you will feel enriched by whatever you do in this. So if you're going to do something like in your ground, I'm not going to go into a lot of details on how to prepare ground because one of the other talks in this series is going to talk more about planting methods. And frankly, we just don't have enough time in this session to get into all the different approaches on how to do this. But a few options out there, if you want to work up some ground that has grass in it right now, you could have a neighbor come with a chisel plow. If you happen to have a neighbor who has some farm equipment, it's harder and harder to find neighbors with small farm equipment these days. But some neighbors will still have smaller farm equipment, especially if they're growing crops that they grow specifically for deer, so that they can attract deer to their property. Um, those crops are typically are done with smaller equipments or with even ATVs used to work those plots up. So if you have a neighbor who's into that, you can certainly ask them to come over and just chisel up a little bit of ground or help you disc it. You could also get a walk behind rototiller, which are a pretty common thing for people who are really into gardening. You could go totally homesteader approach and do what's called double digging, where you literally like dig the ground twice with a shovel. You dig out rows and you flip it over and then you dig it out again and flip it into the next spot. If you're into manual labor and really want to work for your garden, check out double digging. For a small garden, it's really not a whole ton of work to do, but it's still moving a lot of dirt with your shovel. There's also other approaches once you get your ground initially worked up. You can go for minimal till, where you're just working the top inch of soil. You can go for completely no till, where you're not tilling your soil at all. And if you get into no till, you're probably going to be doing something like planting directly into compost that you put on top of your soil, or into other layers. And that's commonly known as sheet composting or as lasagna gardening. And I know one of the other sessions is going to talk about lasagna gardening. So that'll be an interesting one. And lasagna gardening is, despite its name, is not gardening for the lasagna ingredients. It is actually gardening where you layer different types of compost materials on top of each other and different mulching materials. So you might put cardboard over your initial soil, and then on top of that, you might put newspaper And on top of that, you might put garden or kitchen scraps. And then on top of that, you might put leaves. And then on top of that, you might put compost. And then that fresh compost is something you can plant into. And the rest of those layers are going to break down over time and provide a really nice fresh seed bed for you. And that stuff will break down quicker than you think. So if you start making a garden in the fall with that, by the next spring, you'll have nice planting. And you could even start one in the spring and plant directly into it in the springtime. And it just will be a little messier to work with at first. But that's a really nice way if you don't want to actually till up your soil to uh, get it started. And it's essentially just smothering out the grass that's already there and putting something that you can plant into on top of it, like compost or some kind of potting soil of sorts. And then again, if you're using containers, you just get yourself some compost or potting soil, either from the store or you find a farm nearby who's a market gardener and see if you can purchase some compost from them that they've bought in bulk. And if you're in this area of Wisconsin, there's a fair amount of market gardeners in our areas. So you might know of some already, or you might Google for a CSA or any kind of market farm or people who go to the farmers markets, and they're probably buying compost and potting soil in large cubic yard totes. So they'll have a lot on hand that they might sell you or give you if you ask them nicely for it. Planting your crops, step 3. So now that you've kind of figured out why you want to be gardening and what you're going to be doing, as far as how much time you want to commit and the type of things you want to be growing for, and kind of where your location is going to be and how big it's going to be. The next thing you're going to want to do is plan your crops. So those first 2 steps are really going to dictate what kind of crops you end up planting. Space wise, how many crops can you actually fit? Is it going to be a spot that's shady, so you have to do cool season crops? Is it going to be a spot with direct sun, so you can do all sorts of crops? And are you going to have space to do really large vining crops like winter squashes, or crops that you can trellis upright like tomatoes? And knowing those different limitations and what you desire to actually grow, as far as whether it's going to be canning or fresh eating, or if it's anything could be educational, those will help really narrow down the scope of what your garden is going to be like. So after you've kind of wrapped your head around there and have a good idea of what your goals are and your limitations, you can start thinking about actually planning your crops out. So, if you're preserving your crops, you're going to be growing crops that are going to be suited towards preserving and not fresh eating. So you're probably not going to be growing lettuce in that case. No one really successfully freezes lettuce or cans lettuce, but there's a lot of stuff that you can, and there's a lot of stuff that you can freeze. I mean, over here, we even got a pickled carrot in there. That looks pretty cool. And some pickled asparagus. And then there's, of course, all sorts of different chutneys and salsas and things you can make, which are really interesting, which come in real handy if you want to have some interesting spreads or sauces later on. And freezing is an amazing thing to do. I personally don't like canning things. I just really don't like working over that hot stove, and I kind of find it limiting of what you can do as far as not having mushy vegetables all the time. Pickling, I guess, is a pretty good option for some things. But I much prefer to freeze stuff. It's just a lot easier and a lot quicker, and I can do it in a lot smaller batches. Canning, you're gonna have to set up your big pot and get your water boiling and sterilize your jars, and you probably want to be doing a whole bunch at once to make it worth it. For freezing, if you have 5 extra ears of corn, just cut the corn off the cob and stick it in a freezer bag and put it in the freezer, and you're done. And that's pretty nice. So different things that you might want to consider canning or freezing: tomatoes, beans, cucumbers for pickles, corn, mainly for freezing. Peppers freeze really well too. You can just slice up a pepper and either dice it so it's ready for something like a stir fry, or you can cut it off into slices, so it might be better with something like fajitas. And you don't even have to blanch it or anything. You can just stick it raw into a freezer bag and put it in your freezer, and that's great. Broccoli is really good for freezing, and so is cauliflower. Broccoli and cauliflower, you do have to blanch, which is essentially just boiling it in water for a couple minutes so that it's minimally cooked and ready to go into your freezer then. And those are all just really nice, easy things to do. And those are good crops that you can grow in large quantities. And that's really helpful too. So for those kind of gardens, you're going to have bigger plantings of things, and you're going to have more than you can use at once. So instead of growing 2 heads of broccoli for 1 week, you might grow a dozen heads of broccoli. And then when all those broccoli come mature at the same time, you're going to cut them all off and you're going to process them for freezing or canning. And the same with tomatoes. You might be growing way more tomatoes than you can possibly eat fresh, because you're going to make salsa out of them, or you're going to make pasta sauce. And along those lines too, there's different varieties that are better for freezing and canning than others, especially when it comes to tomatoes. You'll want to look for specific varieties that are made for canning and sauce. If you're going to be eating fresh, then you can grow just everything. Just grow everything you possibly can, and you'll have all sorts of good fresh eating to eat. And then it's just a really matter of, what do you want to eat? What do you want on your table? How many different crops do you want to manage? And you're only limited by what you can really be grown in this area, which is really a lot of stuff. You can grow most things that you can grow almost anywhere else in the US, except for some of the really hot weather stuff. Like I've heard some people try doing peanuts and they're not working out too well. So you're probably not going to grow peanuts in your garden up here. But okra, you can grow okra if you want to. You can grow artichokes if you want to, believe it or not. All those things you can certainly do. So planting, seed catalogs are your friend for sure. When we were running our farm as a market garden, we were growing tons of different varieties. I mean, we probably had at least 100 different varieties of stuff out there. And in that case, we might have 15 different tomato types and 5 different pepper types and 3 different carrot types and such. But when you added up all the different kinds of everything, we were probably close to 100 different varieties. And so we just love seed catalogs. And I personally love the planning process for growing a garden. I just find it very interesting. There's always new crops coming out. There's fantastic plant breeders out there who are working on interesting varieties. And we're kind of in really this last like 20 some years, there's been a huge resurgence in market gardeners, as there's been an increasing demand for organic food and for locally grown food, and also an increase in people interested in getting back to the land and doing something that they consider to be of substance and having a real direct result from their work. And so because of that, there's also been a real boom in plant breeding on vegetables and annual fruits, and a real boom in seed catalogs that are catering more to more interesting varieties that you might not be used to seeing in your grocery store. So going through the seed catalogs every year and seeing all the really cool varieties that people are coming up with, and even just new vegetables that didn't even exist in years past, those are really fun to see and can be really inspiring for when you're planting your garden. It can also be a problem if you want to grow every single thing you see, which was often the case for me. Usually every year we'd start out with my list of tomato varieties being at least 20 or 25 different varieties I wanted to grow. And my wife Heather would wisely encourage me to slim it down so that maybe we were only growing 10 varieties of tomatoes. But it's just so cool how many different varieties there are. All sorts of different colors and flavors. Really beautiful stuff. Really beautiful stuff. So that, I should also mention, that's our dog there on the right, Frank. He passed away several years ago, unfortunately, but he was always hanging around helping us out with the planning too. So there you go. These are a couple of my favorite seed catalogs. These are both catalogs that are geared towards professional gardeners and market gardeners. So they're not, they do sell to people who do home gardening, and especially you might see high mowing seeds around in stores. They're more and more selling just smaller size seed packets for people to purchase. I believe if you go to Dragonfly Gardens in our area, you can buy high mowing seeds. They both do a lot of organic seeds, and they're both really geared towards market farmers. And so these seed catalogs are fantastic. if you're thinking about getting into gardening, I would definitely recommend getting their seed catalogs. Go to their website, Johnny's Select Seeds, or to High Mowing's website and request one of their catalogs, and they'll mail you a catalog for free. Or you can look at their catalogs online too. And even if you're not going to order from them directly, um, seeing all the amazing things that they have, and both those catalogs talk about their plant breeding process, which is really fascinating, are fantastic things to do. But they're also just chock full of really good information. There's a lot of information on how to space things, how deep your seeds should be planted, what time of year you can plant your seeds, um, which varieties have different taste profiles to them, what varieties are better for long-term storage. So really, like, getting these catalogs and just looking through them, you'll learn a whole lot about the different crops that you might want to grow. And they'll also become a crucial guide for when you're figuring out how to plan your garden out and what your plantings are going to look like, for being able to look at those seed catalogs and say, okay, High Mowing recommends that I plant my broccoli 12 inches apart, um, or that I seed my carrots 2 inches apart. So they'll tell you the specs that professional vegetable growers will use for their planting schemes, and when you can plant them and how you should be planting them. And that information's really crucial when you're doing your gardening. And it's nice to just have an authoritative source that you can go to for that, to say, yep, these guys know what they're talking about, and I'm just going to follow their plan this time around and see how it works. And maybe I'll adjust it in the future if it doesn't work quite right for me. So definitely recommend getting those catalogs, looking through them. You'll learn a lot and you'll definitely be inspired. So the next step in the planning portion is to, now that you've kind of seen all these seeds that you want to maybe get and all these different varieties, is to actually start like the real planning stuff. And I recommend having two key tools when you're doing this. You're going to want a good notebook, just, any spiral notebook will work. And you're going to want a calendar. You can draw a calendar in your notebook, or maybe you get yourself a little weekly planner or something. But you're going to want both of those to really have a central location to know what you're planting and when you're going to be planting it. So the notebook, this was one of my favorite tools when we were working our gardens. And the notebook is just super important. The notebook was just super important to making sure there's just one spot where all of our information was. So your notebook should answer, what are you planting? When are you going to plant it? What spacing are you planting it at? And when are you going to be harvesting that crop? And then make sure there's room in your notebook underneath each crop for what you actually did in it, and any notes on things that might be of interest to you. You might want to write down that certain crops have certain health benefits, or they have a lot of this vitamin or that, or if you find just little interesting tidbits of it about it, you can write it down. And those are things that when you look at those crops later on, you'll be reminded of those interesting tidbits, and that's fun to have too. It can be a real collection of your thoughts and experiences with those crops, which is really rich to look at. And especially if you have a good notebook, the next year, when you go to make your new notebook for the next year, you look back at your old notebook and you see all the notes that you had on your crops, and you make adjustments based on those notes. So more specifically, your notebook should be listing out each type of vegetable that you want. And you might have a section of your notebook that's just a long list of different crops and different thoughts on which vegetables you want. But then in a reserved part of your notebook, you should have a section for each crop. And I prefer to have a whole page for each crop, because you never know how many notes you're going to want to take on that crop once it comes down to it. And maybe you're down the field, you're going to want to draw a picture or two of your crop, and that's a great place for it to go to. So your section should include, each crop section should include, let's say you have something like carrots, you should list the desired varieties of your carrots. So if you're going to grow a purple carrot and a fresh orange carrot and a storage carrot, you should write down each of those variety types in your carrot section. You should list the days to maturity. So the days to maturity are from the time that you put the seed in the ground or the transplant in the ground, how many days is it supposed to take under normal conditions for that plant to be ripe enough to harvest? So you'll want to list in there how many days you expect to until it's ready to harvest. And that'll be really beneficial when you're doing your calendar portion, because once you're moving on to writing out your dates on your calendar, you can say, okay, I'm going to plant my carrots on June 1st. When am I going to be ready to harvest them? And then instead of digging back through all your seed catalogs and finding each variety, you can just look at your notebook and you'll say, okay, my purple carrot's going to be ready in 60 days, and my storage carrot's going to be ready in 75 days. And so you can write that down on your calendar then, and then you know, okay, here's when it's ready, good to go. You're going to want to write down your target harvest days and your target planting days. So like I said, once you know when you're going to be planting something, then you can just look at your maturity date and say, okay, 60 days from the planting day, it should be ready for harvest. That's not always going to happen exactly, but it'll give you a good ballpark of when to really be checking on it and paying attention to it. Because some stuff in your garden, you're just going to ignore, or just not focus on. And then boom, out of nowhere, it's going to put out a head of broccoli. And you're like, whoa, how did that happen? Didn't see that one coming. And you're going to want to have your eye on it for when it actually happens, because sometimes it can happen really quick. You're also going to want to put notes on how to properly space your plants. Plant spacing is a really big deal when it comes to vegetable farming, because you want to make them as close as you can so that you can get as many plants as you want in there. And you're also, and so that you don't have as much ground to maintain around all your plants as well, as far as weeding and fertilizing goes. But you want to give them the appropriate amount of space so they can really grow to a mature state. And you're going to want to note your seeding depth. And so some seeds want to be put an inch in the ground. Some seeds want to be put just like directly on the ground and have a little dusting of soil on it. A good rule of thumb for that is that most seeds want to be planted about twice the depth as they are tall. So if you have, a pea seed and you're really just not sure how deep you should plant it, just plant it twice as deep as the pea seed is tall. If you have something like a lettuce seed, which is really like holding a large piece of dust in your hand, then that one's just going to kind of just go a tiny bit under the surface. You're going to want to like put it on the ground and then kind of ruffle the soil around it so it just gets a little bit of covering on it. So it has good soil contact on it. But that's really about it for something that small. But there's also a class that's going to talk more about planting and seeding. So they're going to go more into that. So I'm going to try to refrain from going more into depth on that here. And any other notable things that you want to know about your plant, or about details for caring for it, or about details for harvesting it, or anything that you might find interesting. So all those things are good to do, to put in your notebook. Maybe even want to put notes on the different flavor profiles, and if it's expected to be a really crispy carrot, or a really dense carrot or something, or if it's supposed to be really sweet. Those are great things to put in your notebook so that once you harvest it, you can kind of compare it to what the people who are selling you that seed had to say about it. And then you can also say to yourself, yeah, I really like this carrot a lot, and I'm going to write down that it was really sweet. And then you'll know that for next year, because by the time next year comes around, you're not going to remember a whole lot about all the different varieties of stuff you had and all the different crops you had. And it's really smart to write those things down so that you have a solid reference of it, because that'll help you make better decisions next year. So yeah, writing down what actually happened and your actually thoughts are great. Preferably you do this in a different color. I usually use black or pencil, or black ink or pencil for all my planning. And then I leave space underneath all my different varieties so that I have space to write notes on each of those varieties. And I usually write my notes in an orange, so that I know that that's my note color. And that's just kind of a holdover from when I was using multiple different colors for stuff. You can write it in a red or a purple or whatever. But when I see orange in my notebooks, I know that that's me commenting on what our plans had been and what actually happened. So your calendar is going to be done, something that you're going to kind of derive from your notebook. So your notebook's going to have all those interesting dates. Oh, and one more thing about the notebook before I move on to the calendar. All this stuff listed here about days of maturity, target planting, target harvest, plant spacing, seeding depth, notable details, all that stuff can be found in those seed catalogs. So even if you have a bunch of books on gardening, or if you don't want to read a bunch of books on gardening, those seed catalogs are going to give you pretty much all the information you need to do the technical side of spacing things and planting your depths and how long stuff's going to take. So again, those seed catalogs, they're just awesome. They're full of dense information, which can be a little daunting at first, but once you read through them, they're great. And they're really designed to be beautiful too. There's a lot of beautiful seed catalogs out there. Okay, so enough about seed catalogs. Um, your calendar. Your calendar should also have uh, some basic information on it, not nearly as much as your notebook, but really important stuff like when are you going to plant, when are you going to harvest, and when are you going to do some of your maintenance activities. So, you might want to write when you think you're going to be trellising your tomatoes, or when you think you should be weeding your carrots, or if you're going to do something like topping your Brussels sprouts, which is just cutting the top off your Brussels sprout plant at the end of the season to encourage the rest of the Brussels sprouts to fill out. I haven't filled out already. You'll want to write those dates on there. And a lot of times you don't need to write the maintenance dates on there for things like trellising or weeding, because you can tell when you go out into the garden that stuff needs weeded or the tomatoes need trellis because they're drooping over. But it's kind of nice to put those on there as a reminder too, so that you can, if you're doing it with the family or with your kids, you can say, okay, next week we should really be looking at doing some weeding, and you can kind of plan out how much time you're going to need to spend in your garden. Um, but inevitably, there's always plenty of things to do in the garden, so you could spend endless hours there. But it'll help you keep track of your time and anticipate what you're going to need to do. And that should really be about all I would recommend putting on your calendar. And the reason that I recommend having a calendar instead of just a notebook is because on the notebook, you aren't going to necessarily see at a glance what you need to be doing that week. And you will definitely forget when you're supposed to be planting your broccoli, or when you're supposed to be planting your carrots, if you're going to start getting into more stuff. And if you don't want to go into all this deep planning, you might just want to go out and buy a few seed packets or a few transplants and just pop them in the soil and see what happens. You don't have to get this deep into it. But if you want to make a garden that's going to be more complicated and have a lot of stuff going on to it, this is a great way to simplify that. And what I like to consider having to do minimal thinking once you actually have to start executing this stuff, excuse me, not yourself. Um, when we were doing our market garden, the less thinking that I had to do on a day-to-day basis, the better it was, because the more I could just spend time executing the stuff we'd already planned out and telling other people who are working for us what they needed to do and monitoring the things that were essential to monitor. So that's always great if you don't have to think about stuff. And also, again, write down what actually happened. Just because you want to plant your carrots on June 1st doesn't mean you're going to do it. So if you planted on June 8th instead, write that down. And then you can also write down what your new harvest date is. Or when harvest date comes and your carrots aren't ready, you can look back and say, oh, no wonder they aren't ready because I actually planted them on the 8th instead of the 1st. So that's a good, easy, quick reference tool as well then. So every week, look at your calendar and it will tell you exactly what you need to be doing that week in your garden. And that will point you to your notebook. Look at your notebook and it will tell you how to do it. So if your calendar says plant tomatoes, then you need to be looking at your tomato section and making sure you have your tomato plants on hand and making sure that that ground is ready for your tomatoes and you are ready to go. Another nice thing with the calendar too is you might want to put in steps before you get to the planting point. So like I was just saying with tomatoes, if you want your ground to be ready for tomatoes, you probably need to be working up that ground a couple weeks beforehand and making sure that it's freshly turned over and that there's no weeds on it and that it's properly fertilized. And then 2 weeks from that day, you might want to do a little quick weeding on it just to get rid of any surface weeds. And then you'll be ready to put your tomatoes on the ground. So definitely having those steps before planting running into your calendar is a great thing to have as well. So a couple tips here on doing different planting stuff and doing different planning. to make your life easier when you're gardening. There's a lot of stuff to write out in your plans, but a few tips are to stagger your plantings and your harvest. So some plants you're going to want to grow when it's cool outside and some when it's hot. So you're going to want to make sure that you're planting those at the right time. In uh, the Midwest here where we are in Wisconsin, um, most hot plants, they can't take a frost. Some of them can't even take a light frost. And so our typical last frost in Wisconsin, in this northern part of Wisconsin, is around March 20th. So you definitely want to wait to put your tomatoes in the ground until then. I know greenhouses will sell tomatoes well before that and peppers well before that. Uh, and you can definitely take a gamble on it and put it in the ground beforehand, but know that you might lose that plant. But if the weather's looking good and it doesn't look like there's going to be any frost through March 20th, go ahead and put that plant in the ground a little early then. But typically, if you're a market gardener, you're going to wait. You're going to plan your crop until after that, just so you're not risking it. Because having tomatoes a week early just isn't worth losing all your tomatoes, unless it's just an easy thing to replace, which it can be for a home garden. So wait until that March 20th date, even though it's super nice outside, even though it feels like you should have been planting a month earlier, even though all the greenhouses have their tomato plants and stuff ready to go. Wait until that date, unless the weather forecast really looks like it'll bear out nice weather until then. So the hot plants like tomatoes, peppers, beans, corn, squash, and melons, those all want to be planted in that later part of March because they want the ground to be warm, which takes some time. And if the ground's not warm enough, they won't germinate well. And they want the air temperature to be warm. And it's consistently warm all through the night past March 20th usually. So that's those low temps you got to watch out for. Broccolis and kales, lettuce and peas, stuff like that, prefers cool temperatures. So that kind of stuff, you're going to be doing more planting in late April. Oh, you know what? I have a mistake here. Sorry, not March 20th. May 20th, excuse me. I've been saying March over and over again. May 20th. I apologize for that. I had a typo on here and I missed it when I was going. So most of your hot plants are going to take the frost after May 20th. So I apologize to anyone just getting this PDF of this slideshow. I'll correct that before we send that out if we do. So I'm sure there's a few gardeners out there scratching their heads on that one. But May 20th is the date that you want to wait till after May 20th. That's when it's warm enough. March 20th, still pretty cold. You're probably not going to be planting much around then. So your cool stuff is going to want to go in later April probably. Broccoli, kale, lettuce, and peas, and they can do fine in that later April, early May. And because of this, you're going to plant stuff at certain times of years. So also plan for staggered harvests for fresh eating and plan for larger harvests for preserving. So for your staggered harvests, for things like broccoli, you don't want to get all 12 of your broccoli plants coming to maturity at once. Unless you're going to do it for preserving, then you might want all 12 of your broccoli plants coming to maturity at once. So if you're staggering your broccoli planting, that's a great way to ensure that you're having broccoli throughout your growing season. And you might want to do like 2 plants a week to eat. And maybe you're doing it in the springtime and in the fall time when broccoli prefers to be grown. So there's also other ways you want to stagger your plantings, but you're also going to want to group your plantings just to make your life easier too. So nice ways to group plantings are to possibly group them by transplants that are going in the ground. So seedlings or baby plants that you bought from the greenhouse, or maybe you've grown them yourself. You can put those directly into the ground and they're just ready to take off from there. Those, you might want to do all those in one day. So you might want to get all your peppers and tomatoes and eggplants and maybe some of your other transplants that are hot weather plants and plant them all at the same time. And those ones are going to naturally have a stagger to their harvest because they either bear out continually through their growing season or just because they have different maturity days in there. And then maybe you're direct seeding all your stuff at one time for certain crops. So you might have carrots that you direct seed, and then you're direct seeding your beets at the same time. And maybe if you have a couple other things that you're direct seeding too, if it's warm enough, you could also direct seed your green beans at the same time. So that's a nice way to group stuff. And you can do multiple sessions of these groupings too. So maybe you want to plant all of your broccoli transplants and your cabbage transplants in the really early spring, and then plant your hot season transplants several weeks later once it starts getting warm enough in May 20th, and you'll be good to go. And then your seedings you can also do where maybe doing some carrots 1 week with some beets and beans, and then a couple weeks later you're doing another round of carrots, beets, and beans, or whatever else you might want to be direct seeding. But so you can group those things, and that'll make your life a little easier. Another way to um, group a planting, but at the same time stagger the harvest for it, is to plant the same type of crop, but different varieties of it that have different maturity days. So a good example of this would be carrots. Maybe you go to plant your carrots on June 1st, and you plant one variety of carrot that's a 58-day maturity, so it's ready to eat in about 2 months, and you plant another variety of carrot that's a 75-day maturity. So it'll be ready to start eating, a good 15, 17 days after your first set of carrots is done. And so that's a great way. You can mix and match all sorts of different um, maturity dates of the same type of crop so that you don't have to go in there and plant one row of carrots 1 week, and then another row of carrots the next week, and then another row of carrots the week after that. That can be a really nice way to actually just get it all done in one planting. Makes it easier for weeding, easier for bed prep, and you don't have to keep revisiting it multiple times. And that's something that market gardeners will do a lot of. They'll do that with broccoli, they'll do that with carrots, um, they'll do that with cauliflowers. They'll find varieties that mature, a good week apart from each other. And sometimes you can get in, 3 or 4 weeks worth of harvest out of one planting because you've staggered out plants that have maturity dates that are either a week apart from each other, 4 different ones that are each a week apart, or a couple different ones that are 2 weeks apart. And so that's a pretty nice way to do it. And then you also just get to try a lot more different varieties too. And so, like for example, some of those longer maturity carrots, those are great for storage. You can pop those in your freezer, or not in your freezer, in your fridge during the fall time, and they'll hang around in your refrigerator for months. So some carrots are better for storage than others, especially the ones that take longer to grow. So design your layout then. Step 4. Once you've gone through those other steps of figuring out why you're doing your gardening, figuring out where your location is going to be, and then figuring out what kind of plants you actually want to be putting in the ground, what kind of vegetables you're going to be planting, or annual fruits you're going to be planting, or herbs, then you can actually design your layout. So now you know which plants you want to work with. Uh, get inspired. Check out some gardening books from the library. Google pictures of vegetable gardens. There's just so many cool gardens out there, and people are doing it in so many different ways. Really just kind of look around and see what really strikes you. You might say, that's just gorgeous, I want to do that. Or I really think that could fit in my space. Or I think that would be really manageable to do. Manageability is a really big one. And it really doesn't have to be a huge garden either. Like if you look at that picture on the left, there's a lot of plants in there, but that's not a very big space. And that picture on the right that has the what people call square foot gardening, where things are measured out in square feet, you can fit a lot of plants in that too. And also remember, in a lot of those spaces, once you've harvested a plant, you can pull it out and freshen up that soil and plant another plant in there and do another succession for later on. So you might want to have a head of lettuce that you harvest in the early spring, and then you pull it out and you plant some carrots behind it, or you plant some summer squash behind it or something. You can plan for successions like that so you don't have empty space in your garden. Just make sure you're putting enough fertilizer in there to keep feeding those plants. And whether that be like a granulated fertilizer or compost, which is brilliant. Compost is a great fertilizer to use. On a side here quick, if you're going to use compost, you might want to use some kind of other granulated fertilizer to add some of those extra nutrients that compost might be slim on. But there's a whole fertilizer class that's going to be coming up, so I'm sure they're going to cover a lot of stuff on that too. But get inspired, see what looks cool, figure out what's going to work in your space, and start designing how your plants are going to be laid out. A nice thing is to focus on the density of your plants. Trying to make things really tight spacing is great. And you also want to focus on something that's going to be gardener friendly, something that you're going to want to be in there with, something that's going to make you feel good about being there and not feel, if you don't like being really dirty, maybe have some nice mulching down so that you don't have to get really dirty. If you want to have that full dirt experience, go ahead and keep it bare dirt if you want to. Um, but something that you're going to enjoy being in, that's going to be pleasant. And really keeping your weeds down is a huge part of making it a pleasant experience. So whether you mulch your aisles or really aggressively weed them, I would definitely recommend mulching. That works great to keep weeds down and makes it a really nice environment to be in, especially when it's wet outside. But anything that makes it a place that is just enjoyable to be in and has beauty to it, and is easy to maintain as well, is a great part of focusing on it being gardener friendly. Thinking about your layout also, think about the long term. Many people like to do permanent beds, and you can see an example of that on the top here, where they've had beds that over time have become raised up because they are walking in the aisles, and they're also aggressively hoeing out those aisles and moving any of the excess soil onto the top. And in this case, this is actually on a market gardening farm down in Illinois. Um, they also put a bunch of compost on top of their garden beds, and they heavily amend it with stuff like compost because they know exactly where their plants are going to be all the time, and they want that ground to be nice and loose and friable and easy to work with. And they're not going to come in there with a rototiller and till it up every time they need to plant something. They're going to pull whatever leftover residue of their harvested plant is off that ground. They're going to maybe do a really, really light tillage, or they're going to go over and just hoe the ground a little bit just to kind of loosen it up a bit. Or maybe they're going to put just fresh compost on and plant directly into that compost. But they've got a nice permanent bed system. And that permanent bed system just allows you to really plan out stuff. If you're going to have a permanent bed and have a standard size bed, then that's going to help you figure out your plant spacing as well. Because if you have a bed size that's 30 inches wide, you know that all of your 30-inch wide beds have to fit into your garden space, and you can only fit so many plants on a 30-inch wide bed. But the picture below is that same farm, same bed system, but with crops on it. So you can see just how many plants are packed into that 30-inch bed system. It's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. They do a great job. And you can really just, you can grow a lot on a small space. You really can. So once you've got your layout down, you're going to have to revise your crop plan. Really and realistically, you're going to be doing your layout while you're doing your notebook, because they really play off of each other, right? How big your layout's going to be, what size beds you might end up having, how much you can fit in is really going to determine what plants you're going to grow and how many of them grow. So really your notebook and your layout's going to be going in tandem with each other, and you're going to have to revise both of them as you go because you want it to fit to your space. And even though you can grow a lot in a small space, don't overgrow. You will find it unpleasant if you have to take care of way more plants than you want to. So it's always better to do less than it is to do more in these cases, especially if it's your first year. After your first year, you'll have a really good idea of what you can handle and what you want to do. And then, go bananas after that if you want to, for sure. But making sure it's an appropriate size is a really important part of that, making it gardener friendly, and making it enjoyable to be in and not a stressor. Especially if you have kids that are helping you. The educational component for kids are great helpers in the garden, and they find it really interesting. And some of them might be really gung-ho with weeding, but only for a certain amount of time. Once they lose interest, it's going to be a real struggle to get them back out there. So you want to make sure that you're delivering it to them in short doses and making it manageable so that they enjoy it. And so they feel like mom and dad or grandma and grandpa aren't just going to drag them out to the garden again when they'd rather be doing something else. And if they want to spend more time in the garden, then you have things to do in the garden. You'll always find ways to explore the garden more, draw pictures, lay down extra mulch, do extra weeding, do research on the crops, take pictures of them. There's just always more things you can do in the garden, even if you're done with your regular maintenance stuff. Source your plants. Once you know what you're being growing, you'll know if you want to be growing them from seed or if you want to buy them from a greenhouse, or if you want to grow your own transplants. Uh, Buying them from greenhouses is a really nice option if you have a smaller garden, because it can be really difficult to get things to go from seed successfully in our short season, especially things like tomato plants and pepper plants who really want to be able to take advantage of their full growing season. So having them be able to be popped into the ground right when it's warm enough really will give them a good head start, and that'll make it really nice. Um, so figure out how you want to do that. Um, and there you go, you're ready. Once you know where your seeds are coming from, once you know where your transplants are going to be coming from, what your desired varieties are. One more note about where you're getting your plants from. This will also determine what kind of varieties you have. So if you're going to go to a greenhouse and buy varieties, you can't really be as picky about which different kinds of plants you're going to have, but typically they'll have a few different varieties you can choose from. If you're ordering seeds, the world is your oyster. You can go nuts and get all sorts of crazy stuff, which is really fun. Uh, but definitely making greenhouse trip is really fun too, and makes it a lot easier for you. So once you have all that set up, um, you know where your garden's going to be, you know what it's going to look like, you know what you're doing for it, you know what kind of seeds you want, what kind of transplants you want. Um, you've got that all figured out. If this is stuff that really interests you, definitely watch the other classes, and you'll be ready to go. So you can start planting a garden this spring then. And it's a lot of prep work to get there to a successful garden. But personally, I find the planting to be, or the planning to be just as fun as the planting. And in some cases more enjoyable, because you really get to, the planning is where, in my opinion, you get a lot of your creativity out, and you really get to exercise some of that creative side before you start getting into the part where you're actually just following the plan. So there's more in the in this garden series coming up from the Augusta, Amory, Ellsworth, and Clear Lake libraries here. On March 8th, there's going to be a class on seed starting. On March 15th, there's going to be a class on fertilizers. On March 22nd, there's going to be a class on alternative gardening methods. And I think that one's going to cover like the lasagna planting and the sheet mulching, like I had mentioned before. And then on March 29th, there'll be a class on weed control. All of those topics are just super important for gardens. And you can always give it a go without knowing much about those and just having a basic hoe in your hand. But the more you know, the better your gardening experience is going to be, for sure. So, oh, and it sounds like there's also more in April, which I don't have on here, which someone is putting up there in the chat. So it sounds like the chat isn't working for the YouTube. So unless there's any questions on the Zoom presentation, then I think we're good to go.
Thank you so much, Brandon. This is Caroline from the Ellsworth Public Library.
Okay.
We are having technical problems with our YouTube chat, so we don't have any questions right now, or any way to get you questions to answer. But you did an amazing job starting off our series, so I really appreciate that. If anyone is viewing this and does have questions that come up, please contact one of the libraries that is sponsoring this. You can find contact information for any of the libraries, Augusta, Ellsworth, Amory, and Clear Lake, on our web pages. And we will make sure to pass those questions along to you, Brandon, and we can kind of follow up with people that way. In a couple of days, this presentation will be available to view from the recording once we have it closed captioned and ready to go. So I think there's a lot of things I would love to refer back to in your presentation, so people will have the chance to do that. So thank you again, Brandon, and thank you everyone for joining us for our first in this gardening series. And we will see you at 6:30